Chapter 5 The Mandate of the Ash. The War Council Chamber was a tomb of cold stone and dying echoes. Moonlight, thin and sickly, filtered through the narrow embrasures, tracing the jagged edges of maps that had failed to save a city. Otnam sat in the High Commander's chair, his fingers tracing the deep-grained oak of the table. The wood felt ancient, saturated with the weight of centuries of governance. Yet to his touch, it felt brittle, as if the very concept of the old Amaranthan was ready to crumble into sawdust. The connection to evening glory was a low, persistent thrum in his marrow. It was not the fire of a warrior, but the cool, steady pulse of a lantern in a storm. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, the world of stone and blood vanished. He saw only the silver thread of his purpose, a path paved with the memories he had surrendered. He had healed a mother, broken a warlord, and stayed the hand of a general. But as he drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep, the whispers of the city reached him through the walls. They were not whispers of gratitude, but of hunger, a hunger for certainty, for a name they could believe in. Dawn arrived not with warmth, but with a gray, oppressive light that smelled of wet ash. Otnam rose before the first bells, his joints stiff, his cloak still stained with the salt of the previous night's divine exertion. He did not call for servants. He moved through the halls himself, his footsteps a rhythmic tolling that seemed to wake the very stones. By the time the sun had cleared the jagged skyline, the council chamber was no longer empty. Lyra Stormwind stood by the window, her silver hair caught in the morning light like a drawn blade. Beside her, Marcus Ironheart was a pillar of scarred leather and grim silence, his hand resting habitually on the pommel of his sword. The council members, the 7 who remained, sat huddled at the far end of the table, their fine robes a mockery of the soot-stained walls. "The city is awake," Otnam said, his voice cutting through the morning chill. "And they are waiting. A public vote," Marcus grunted, his eyes fixed on Otnam. "In 30 years of service, I've seen kings crowned with oil and usurpers crowned with blood. I've never seen a man ask the rabble for permission to lead." "The rabble are the ones who bled while these men hid," Otnam replied, casting a cold glance at the counselors. "If I am to lead them, I will not do so from a throne of secrets. I will do so by their choice. Lyra, ensure the council remains together. If one of them so much as looks at a side gate, treat it as a confession of treason. Marcus, gather the guard. We set the stage in the square. 2 boxes, one for the past, one for the future." The town square was a theater of ruins. The great fountain, once the pride of Amaranthan, was now a jagged stump of marble, its basin filled with brackish water and debris. Yet, despite the devastation, the people came. They emerged from cellars, from tents made of sailcloth, and from the skeletal remains of their homes. Thousands of eyes, hollowed by grief and sharpened by survival, turned toward the makeshift platform Otnam had ordered constructed. 2 transparent boxes sat center stage, crafted from the thick glass of the apothecary's windows. One was etched with the seal of the council. The other was bare, save for the name Otnam carved into the wood beneath it. Scribes, their fingers ink-stained and trembling, distributed small slips of parchment marked with the sigil of the city. As the sun reached its zenith, Otnam stepped forward. He felt the weight of the silence, a physical pressure that seemed to push against his chest. He saw Elena in the front row, her small hand clutching her mother's skirt. The woman looked pale but steady, a living testament to the power he wielded. "People of Amaranthan," Otnam began. His voice was steady, but it lacked the supernatural thunder he had used to cow General Voss. He spoke as a man, his words carrying the raw edge of exhaustion. "We have survived the night, but the dawn is cold, and our walls are broken. I did not come here to be your master, but your protector. Yet, power without consent is merely another form of siege. Today you choose. You choose the men who sat in this square when the walls were whole, or you choose the man who stood in the breach when they fell." He stepped back, gesturing to the counselors. "Speak," he commanded. "Defend the city you lost." The elder councilman, A man named Valerius, whose family had held a seat for 4 generations, stepped to the edge of the platform. His hands shook as he gripped the railing, his voice thin and reedy. "Citizens, friends," Valerius started, his eyes darting across the sea of faces. "We have served Amaranthin with honor for years. The blood tide was an unprecedented storm, a force of nature that no walls could have anticipated. We made the hard choices. We preserved the archives, the grain stores, the very essence of our history. To have thrown our lives away in a futile defense would have been the ultimate betrayal of our legacy." "Legacy?" A voice barked from the crowd. A blacksmith, his arms black with soot, spat on the ground. "My forge is a pile of rubble. Where was the essence of Amaranthin when the tide was burning my livelihood?" A councilwoman, younger and sharper than Valerius, stepped forward to bolster him. Her voice was iron-wrapped in velvet. "Intelligence was compromised. Our spies were turned, our networks shattered from within. We acted on the information we had to minimize casualties. Every life lost is a tragedy we carry. But Amaranthin still stands because we knew when to bend so we would not break." Otnam moved back to the front, his shadow lengthening across the platform. "You bent," he said, his voice a low, dangerous growl that carried to the back of the square. "But did you warn them? Did you tell the families in the Eastern Ward that the gates were buckling? Or did you keep that compromised intelligence to yourselves while you fortified your own manners?" The silence that followed was deafening. Valerius paled, his mouth working but no sound emerging. We feared a panic," the councilwoman stammered. "A disorganized flight would have led to a massacre in the streets. My grandson died in his sleep," a woman screamed from the crowd, her voice cracking with a grief that tore through the air. She pushed her way to the front, her face a mask of tear-streaked ash. "He was 6. We lived 3 streets from the gate. If we had known, if we had just had an hour, he would be here." "You didn't fear a panic. You feared for your own skins." The murmur of the crowd turned into a roar, a tidal wave of anger that seemed ready to sweep the platform clean. Marcus moved instinctively, his guards stepping forward with shields raised, but Otnam held up a hand. "The truth is the first stone of the new wall," Otnam said, his voice cutting through the din. "Cast your votes. Let the boxes speak for the dead and the living alike." The voting took hours. It was a somber, methodical procession. Men and women, some limping, some carrying children, walked past the transparent boxes. The rustle of parchment was the only sound, a dry, whispering wind that carried the city's judgment. Otnam watched from the shadows of the platform, his dark vision picking out the folded slips as they fell. He saw the council's box remaining largely empty, a hollow glass tomb, while his own filled with a white drift of paper. As the final votes were cast, Otnam stepped to the center of the square. "Before we hear the count," he said, his voice softening, "let us remember the price of this moment, a minute of silence for those who will never see the city we are about to build." He bowed his head and reached deep into the well of his soul. He didn't ask for power, he asked for peace. "Evening glory," he whispered in the silence of his mind, "guide them. Let the love they bore in life be the light that leads them home." A subtle change came over the square. It was not a flash of light, but a softening of the air, a gentle silver luminescence that seemed to rise from the very stones. It felt like the touch of a cool breeze on a fevered brow. The anger in the square didn't vanish, but it settled, replaced by a profound, heavy solemnity. For a moment, the thousands gathered there were not a mob, but a single grieving family. Marcus stepped forward, holding a sheet of parchment. His face, usually a mask of military indifference, showed a flicker of something close to awe. "The votes are tallied," Marcus announced, his voice booming across the square. "By the will of the people of Amaranthin, the council receives 27% of the vote." He paused, his gaze meeting Otnam's. 73% have cast their lot with Otnam." A cheer erupted, not the frantic, desperate roar of a battle, but a deep, resonant sound of relief. It started with the soldiers and spread through the crowd until the very ruins seemed to vibrate with it. Elena was jumping, her small face alight with a joy that felt like a victory in itself. Lyra Stormwind stepped toward Otnam, her hand moving to her brow in a crisp, formal salute. "The people have spoken," she said, her voice low enough only for him to hear. "The crown is yours, Warlock. May you find it lighter than I suspect it is." Otnam turned back to the crowd, his hand raised for silence. "You have given me your trust. Now I ask for your justice. What shall be done with those who failed you?" The suggestions came thick and fast. Imprisonment, exile, the gallows. The anger was still there, a raw nerve exposed to the air. "They should rebuild," the blacksmith shouted. "Let them carry the stones they let fall." Elena stepped forward, her voice small but clear in a sudden lull. "They shouldn't lead anymore," she said, looking up at Otnam. "But they should help. They should work beside us. If they really love the city like they said, they'll want to fix it." Otnam nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "A child's wisdom is often the purest justice. My first act as your king will be this: the council is dissolved. But their service is not ended. I will speak with each of them in turn. Those who truly wish to atone will find a place among you, rebuilding the walls and the homes they allowed to burn. Those who cannot will find no home here." He turned to Lyra and Marcus. "Bring them to the chambers, one by one. I wish to see the hearts of the men and women who would rule Amaranthan." As Otnam walked back toward the council building, the sun began its descent, painting the ruins in shades of gold and long violet shadows. The slate was clean, the bond was true, and for the first time since his awakening, Otnam felt the weight of the future not as a burden, but as a promise. The reconstruction had begun. End of Chapter 5.